We've come into a section of our classes that I really want to step back a little bit and lay a foundation. A number of people that I have known recently and before have not understood how I feel about paganism. So I want to address that, and we'll see where this topic takes us, because it still ties into the history. If any of you have ever purchased my book, Be Ye Holy, it tells you how Be Ye Holy became into existence. The book, recently released on Amazon, is an updated version of the original book. So I would say it was about 93 when I began to see, coming across the Christian bookstores, terms that I was not familiarized with. I was not one just to pick up any material and read it. But I had been listening to people like Tex Mars. He had a radio program, and several other individuals. And I saw their books inside the store, and I picked them up and looked at them and found out I was completely oblivious to terminology and how the New World Order and the elite, one world governments, and all this kind of stuff came into play. As a Christian back then, and only having pastored a few years, I really knew nothing to speak of about any of these topics. But eventually I was challenged. I was challenged by, as I've said in the book, and I'll say again, a high-ranking Satanist coming to my assembly and saying that Christians were stupid. They were blind, and how they had moved their devices into our homes and into our churches. But we were not shown this, and that our God was not capable of showing this. And this is quite a paraphrase of the original statement. I'll take responsibility for my ignorance. I'll take responsibility for my lack of follow-through. But don't ever put that on God. And I stated such in that meeting. The next day I went out to go find out what was the New World Order, what was paganism, how did paganism come into our assemblies, take control in our lives, etc. So this research started in approximately 1993. I wrote a book, the first Be Ye Holy book, in probably 94, 95, and I began to lay down the statements of paganism. I did not start live streaming until 2017, or broadcasting on YouTube, Facebook, etc. So all of these years had passed, and I was not one to bring up constantly the same things that I stood against, and yet it was obvious that those that I was over as a spiritual leader was taught the truth about these things. So when it goes to the fact that I have totally been against paganism, occultism, anything that recognizes another God, this had been out there for many, many years. When I went to write my second book, What's Up with Them Angels, it ran me into the holidays. And I wanted to make sure that before I made any statement that would impact anybody's life, that I had all my facts together. And I could not just make a blanket statement and hope that people would listen and apply. So I've always challenged you, anybody listening to me, always do your own research. Maybe the way I see it is definitely not the way that you see it. Maybe you can impart more knowledge to me. I've never been rejecting of that kind of situation. But don't tell me your opinion and can't substantiate it, can't prove it, because I'm not going to listen to you. You see, I spent many, many years as a Christian listening to all the rhetoric and all of the brainwashing and never really knowing that there was more to this than what was displayed before me. I believed there was, but I didn't know how to find that. So I began to seek God, and I told myself anything that was in the Bible, I would accept it. Anything that was outside of the Bible, I would make a stand on it. If it wasn't there and can't be supported, I wouldn't do it. So I'd started that many, many years ago. And so I basically started with a clean slate. everything. And I found myself on my knees, the Bible opened, trying to find direction. You know, Julian, the direction wasn't in that book. Though I sought to try to find, I thought it was my ignorance and my lack of understanding or my lack of comprehension, not able to read and put it all together. I placed it completely upon me, never on that book. And I still hung on to that book for many, many years afterwards. I strayed away or pulled away from teaching specifics that could not be verified. In other words, I wouldn't give the prophecies like I mentioned last week about Ezekiel, because there was more to Ezekiel than was ever in the text. Or about other prophets, there was more than what was ever expressed. Now, here's the statement I'm going to make. I can say I don't believe in the prophets, but that does not mean I don't believe in prophecy. I may not believe in the individual's existence or the story is accurate about that individual, but it does not mean that I don't believe that prophecy is a part of life under the influence of God and certain personalities and individuals. So I'm not discarding that. I'm discarding historical evidence that can't prove the individual existed or didn't exist. Because if a prophecy was so profound, then why did not all the countries across the globe pick up on that and say about what was seen and heard and from the travelers that came across the different regions? There was no documentation in any other country. Well, we say in the scriptures that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses let everything be established. Would it not have been a greater witness for somebody in, let's say, Turkey, or maybe even Russia, have written a story about a specific prophet that took place in the Middle East, and know his name, not just guess a name or throw an extra name to it, but would that not substantiate the truth behind the individual and the feats? If these things were substantiated in other countries as a form of a witness, we could say, we can take a closer look at that. The problem that we have today is, I want to look specifically at the Christian world. If I ask you, what do you believe? And you say, I believe in the Bible. What part of the Bible do you believe in? I think that's when you're going to get into some shady areas.
The back cover.
You see, without the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, Christians do not have a salvational plan. The preachers will never get up and say, this goes along with the story of Mithra, or there were 12 different rising and dying and resurrecting gods, and it goes into this frame. They don't want to do that, because if they do it, they can't even answer their own questions. So when I talk about knowing history, understanding history, I'm not talking about vast volumes of it. I'm talking about specifics. If I want to know something specific, I'm going to go and research it. For many, many years, I've used libraries. I spent many hours, months, years in libraries, and even have my own personal library of 80,000 books. And if you ask me, do I know what's in them? I would say at least 75, 85%. I still know what's in those books. You put them on my hand and I'll tell you what's in it. Just show me the outside of the cover. I may not remember all of the details, but I'll remember why I kept that book. My hunger to know God in an intimate way, knowing that He existed, far exceeded my indoctrination. I knew there was one thing that was unquestionable through time. I love God. Above all things, I love God. And my intense desire to please Him and to know Him was a driving factor behind every action I've ever taken. Before I made the announcement, and I think about 2022, that I did no longer believe in the Christian precepts or Jesus Christ, I had done many years of examination. And you remember this, Julian, we had this conversation years before I ever made it an open declaration to a station, a channel. The church knew it,
Right.
but I had never really come forward. I just quit teaching about it. And I think in one sense that was really not the best way to do it, but I will tell you why. Because I didn't know how to explain it. I did not know how to explain to you why I saw these things. When I look at, let's say, the Bible in general, the one main factor that always got to me after realizing that the God of the Old Testament was not the God of the New Testament was the fact that the wrong one was getting the credit. That God was the Redeemer. He was the Savior. He was the Creator, the miracle worker, the amazing. I think there's no earthly terms that could say what all He is. I've said this many times. I respect God. I revere Him to the greatest. I will never put Him on a man's level because He is superior to that. And for me to put Him on my level means I am demeaning Him. I'm putting Him as my equal. I can't call Him my father. I can't call Him my daddy, because to me He's more than an earthly being that I can identify with. He's more than everything, all consumed. So I have always been one to diligently seek out the answer. And what people don't realize is that I have been one to try to prove it right and not wrong. But inevitably, I run into it was wrong. When I find out this information, it's then in my hands to whether or not I share it or reject it or how I deal with it. But I always deal with it according to the Lord. Whatever He tells me to do has been the driving force in my life. So we talked about history. We talked about how important it was in science and in all types of avenues of our life, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, how important it was. But I want to take this another step further. I want to talk about how your past is affecting you today. There's not many of us who came up in a perfect family situation, and I'm going to tell you the reason. First of all, it was never taught. We never saw it in physical examples. We never saw it in school. We were taught a lot of things in public school, but it doesn't mean it was things that was actually going to benefit us in our natural life. So, however we interact with our parents and our siblings is carried over in our lives. Now, I'm going to give you kind of a weird situation, and I'm going to ask you all that's working with me on this broadcast right now. At your present current age, do you feel like you are, in my case, 70? Or in your mind, do you still feel much younger? How would you respond to that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like I'm in my 20s, you know. So, yeah, I don't think I'll ever age.
See, that's a weird part because you never really think about that until you get to this age. I'm 55 years old, and your mind doesn't age. Your mind still telling you that you're in your 30s. You know, you have all the energy, you have all the, all the stamina and everything, but you don't. Your body's telling you different. So like,
Anything to add to that, Mike?
I mean, yeah, I can see his point because yeah, in my mind, I can still do everything that I've done when I was younger, but yeah, my body is telling me nope, they're not talking to you. They can run, you cannot. They can do all this other stuff and crawl on the floor and do all this other stuff, but you cannot. So yeah, I can definitely see where you're coming from, where your mind still thinks, "Oh, I can do that," but your body's telling you no. No.
And your body goes on strike, and you're going, I get down on the floor, and if I don't have a hoist to get me up, I'm going to be crawling to some place to help me get myself back up at 70. Now, I know there are some people who are fit and trim and all this kind of stuff, and more power to them. But that's not me. And in my mind, I say, well, why can't I? Why can't I do that? I don't stop and think, your body's deteriorating at this point, and, you get this jiggly joggly down here with age, and I could wear tape and have a more youthful face, or I could just accept the fact
Nothing
that I'm
that
part
Botox
turkey.
can't fix.
Or that I could just say I'm related to the turkey generation. The thing is that time progresses and we change. And hopefully we mature. But what happens to us in a mental state is however we interacted with our parents and our siblings is what we carried over with us throughout our adult life. Now, I'm not into psychology. I was one at one time going to be a doctor of psychology, and when I found out it was steeped in occultism, I shut that door. But recently, I did a little search just to see what today's standard would be, and I found out nobody knows the answer. So let me throw it to you. The relationship that a woman has with her father is going to impact their marriage. Her husband and her are going to have difficulty. Guaranteed. As long as that father is not showing that young girl what she should look for in a husband by his actions, she will always pick the wrong person. Always. Unless she's very determined not to follow the precepts that were instilled in her. So if you look for a spouse or somebody potentially be married to, find out first what was her relationship with her parents. What was her relationship with her father? What was her relationship with her mother? It makes a big difference. Now, some people, like Stacy and myself, we didn't have the examples that we needed, so we purposed in our mind that we would be what everybody else we wanted to see in everybody else and never had the advantage of. But let's look at men. The relationship that a man has with his mother is also going to impact the relationship he has with his wife. If he has a bad relationship with his mother, he will never be able to make a mature bond between him and his spouse. And someone says, well, am I supposed to go back and make it right with my mother? No, it's time to move on from this point, identify what the issue is, and start making conscious decisions to change some behavior. And when you've had that relationship with your mother that's negative, you're never going to have a relationship until you consciously make changes. Consciously saying, I'm not going to be involved in that again. But this requires communication. If you find somebody that you want to be with, and they want to be with you, you really need to do a lot of talk, and not tick-tock, but talk. Because the talking, the expression, the ideas, the understanding is essential. And if you cannot do that, you are not ready to the next step of marriage. It's not all about sex. You young people think it's all about getting a fulfillment in sex. Sex fades with age. It's not your priority unless you're taking Viagra or any of the other enhancements. Because as you age, your body's not supposed to be bringing forth children. And all
Depending
things
on
start
what location
changing.
of the world you're at.
It's true. It does
I want to
depend on what part
insert this, two things here. People, they tend to go to psychiatrists to, I guess, to help themselves. But 9 times out of 10, the psychiatrists are going through worse things than that individual they're trying to help. So it's like, how can you help me when you can't even, fix your own situation? And another thing, I agree with the communication. When I was dating, I guess you could say we dated. I guess we didn't really date. But anyhow, when I was with my husband, as soon as we figured out whether we were going to start that relationship, we spent hours, and I mean hours. He was at work or I was doing something. We were always constantly on the phone, not just giggly goggly, how people do it, but just really trying to get to know each other, what we expected out of each other in a relationship, if we were on the same path, and if that's something that we could work through. It was always to me, yeah, you would have to have a complete communication line with your loved one, your spouse, not just your spouse, but your family members, and just always constantly communicating, because people can't read minds. They don't know what you express, and they don't know what your dislikes or likes if you don't express them. So you would have to have some type of open communication. How would you know you have a child, and if your child is hungry, if without communication? I mean, at first they can't speak, and they cry and cry and cry. So eventually you figure out, okay, let me give them a bottle, and if the baby's calm and cool, collect with the bottle, then the baby was hungry. Or if the baby was wet and feeling discomfort, things like that. It still took some type of communication. Unless the person is mute, then you learn sign language. I mean, so it has to have some type of communication whether it be in relationships with your loved ones or at a job. There has to be some type of communication.
There has to be maturity. If there's no maturity with ability to express to somebody who you love that you're having a difficult time with something, then you're not ready to get married. You're still a baby. You're still immature. People don't look at the character they're marrying. They just look at the sex. And when you first meet somebody and you're all wrapped up in the sex, then everything looks so beautiful and so crazy and wonderful. But after that honeymoon is over, then you see what you got married to. And that's generally when the reality hits it. My grandma used to say, in the first 6 months, you're going to find out what that person is like. Sometimes it didn't take that long to find out what that person was like. And then you're stuck. You're literally stuck in a relationship that you don't want to be in. And if you're afraid to express yourself or convey your thoughts with complete comprehension, then you're not ready for any relationship.
Here's one thing that I always thought about, because especially with couples, when couples seek help, external help, to me, it's never going to work if you're not willing, as a couple, try to work it out together yourself. Because it has to start there. It has to start with your communication, your willingness to work out that problem that you're having before anything can happen. Because if you're not willing to work it out, nobody's going to fix it for you. Nobody can fix it for you because you're not willing yourself to work it out.
That's very true. I spoke to you the other day, Julian, about the progression. And I used 3 forms of glue. Do you remember this conversation? And I said that when I was little, my grandma used to make us some paste. And it was made out of flour and water. And when she would make it, we would use that paste to do our little paper projects. So we didn't have to go buy anything. It didn't last, but we was able to compensate our little projects. As time progressed, there was something that came out called Elmer's glue. Elmer's glue was the fix-all for everything. You could use Elmer's glue and you could make that paper stick longer, last many ways and for centuries. And that worked for a time frame. But then came super glue. Now, super glue was a type of glue that everybody really wanted because it was bonding. It was going to stick. But don't you dare get on your fingers, because you might have to use a file to get that stuff off your fingers. But it stuck with many things. And then now we have other unbelievable bonding glues that will stick and make things hold forever. So I said, when you look at your life in sequence from your childhood, you don't have a problem about whether it lasts very long. If it's just a little paper ring that you make or some little design, arts and craft, there's no big deal, because probably the next few days you won't even remember it. You won't care. So when you get into larger projects, so as you develop in growth, you realize that what you used for the glue that made it stick before won't bring anything together for a longer period of time unless changes are made. You got to go out and you got to buy the better stuff. And you got to pay a little more money than just flour and water. And as this happens, you aren't realizing that you're not having to do all the mixing now. You can just apply, and you'll see that the bond lasts longer. When you're a child, you're not interested in long-term relationships because you feel like your little nucleus of world is going to be forever, never going to get any different. And then as you get into your teenage years and you start realizing that the opposite sex is inexistent, and you want something that's a little more lasting, so you're going steady or whatever it is that you want to term it. But you hadn't thought about the long-term effect. You're just thinking about the instant giggly-goggly, hello, ha, 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 fine, and, that little puppy love. When you get out of school, you start getting into where there's more issues to deal with. Work, home, other people are incorporated that you weren't familiarized with. Now things are not really holding as well as they should hold. So you up it to something that says now you're going to select who you put in that inner circle. It's not just going to be everybody in the classroom and being everybody's best friend. In this case, in social media, you don't care whether you got the likes or the dislikes, the influence or not the influence, but you care about the way that you are connecting with other people. In that, you're now moving into your superglue effect. Relationships that are going to last a lot longer if they are taken care of properly. If they are not, they will eventually break and frail and lose the luster of the grip. In relationships, this is what happens. You're fine when you first start. Everything is the greatest of ever. Then comes the daily application of life and struggles, financial and otherwise. And now you're seeing that that's starting to get a little tarnished and a little worn. But you're not going over to put more super glue on it to make it last, because at this point, you're not really sure that you want to stick to that. So you start looking for a way to release that you got yourself into. People have horrific situations when they first involve themselves in drugs, sex outside of marriage, and alcohol. The 3 deal breakers of any relationship. Multiple affairs by a spouse or even by a boyfriend is a deal breaker. If that man tried to have sex with you before the appropriate time, then I can guarantee you're not the first one he's ever done this with. So expect him to be unfaithful down the road. Grandma used to tell me once a horse jumps a fence, he knows how to get over that fence every time. Some of those are kind of old sayings, but the truth of the matter is it becomes easier and easier to be unfaithful. And that unfaithfulness is a deal breaker. So you wouldn't want to stay bonded to the individual who does not bring completion to your life. But also, what completion do you bring to their life? It's always just seems one-sided, give to me, do for me, I got it. Well, that's really not the situation. I've said it's no 50-50. It's never a 50-50. It's always 1,000. I'll give my 1,000%, and you give your 1,000%, and our relationship will never wave. Yes.
Even though our marriage, me and Stacy's marriage, was ordained by God, you still have to put work into it. It's not just, okay, he put it together, it's going to last a lifetime. You still have to put the work in each and every day. And that's what we've done through communication, through making adjustments and stuff like that our marriage has lasted. But like I said, even though it was ordained, you still have to put the work in it. Marriage is not one of those things that's just going to be, because you're fine right now, it's going to be fine tomorrow, it's going to be fine the next day. That's not the way it works. marriage is a thing that you're going to have to work on each and every day.
Absolutely right. And in one sense, you all had an arranged marriage. God ordained it. But you then had to still get to know each other. And you still had to need to know how to work with each other. Not just, I have to do nothing because it's meant of God for us to be together. There's a lot, and I say this, and said it even recently, to Stacy. I look at the different marriages in which I've been officiated or some part in their life, and I can say every marriage that has failed has always failed for the lack of communication. Instead of saying, I really don't like green peas, they eat the green peas and then fuss about something else because they don't like the green peas. I cannot stand green peas, not by themselves. I like sweet green peas, and I don't mind them being in like a chicken pot pie or something where I don't have that as my focus. But so don't make me green peas knowing that I can't stand them. I've never been able to stand them. Even from a child, I used to play with them in my plate, my mother told me. I like to see them roll around, but I just couldn't see them going down. But if you haven't got the courtesy to say, honey, I'm really not too crazy about green peas. Instead of, I hate green peas. Well, no, they probably forgot you hate green peas. So to assume that you're superior instead of engaging with courtesy and kindness creates a lot of issues. There's a lot of marriages and remarriages and marriages and remarriages until the point you have to ask, who's at fault? Was it the one who picked it or the one who couldn't communicate with it? What were the ulterior motives? And this is where the problem comes in. When you have communication as an issue in the first place, then the engagement of substances, alcohol, drugs, etc., and if you're on medication, medication will also affect your mind. And so these are going to be factors that you don't take into consideration. All of a sudden you have a health issue and they've prescribed medication, but you didn't do your background research on it, and it affects your mind and your mood and everything about you, and your spouse can't understand why you've changed. Well, you haven't taken the time to notice what was going on in that person's body. So these issues become a factor in relationships. And it's a shame that people are not taught this early on, that these changes can be made throughout society in every country, instead of this Lord and master, slave and servant, and all these mentalities of treating people with such condescending attitudes. I understand a great deal about marriages, and some of you are not aware of this, but even early on, when I started the church, I was counseling people outside of our local assembly, and some were very prominent, and I'm not going to go into what all they did, but they found out about me through my radio program. And through that radio program, they started coming to me for counseling. And it always excited me when they started to apply what I was teaching them. When they didn't apply, it was going to be a complete disaster. Okay. But when they started applying what I was teaching to them, I can remember the reconciliations of people who were not even staying together, and how even months later, until I lost contact with them, they would tell me how great their marriage was from both ends, because they learned to apply what I was teaching them in the first place. You see, you only get out what you put in. You put in nothing, you get out nothing. So we need to understand that relationships, whether they're natural or they're spiritual, you're only going to get out of it what you put in it. Spiritually speaking, you might think you're a spiritual giant. But if you refuse to accept teaching and instruction and seeking God, then you're really nothing at all. We seem to have a tendency to think the more spiritual we are, the more that people should listen to us. And I want to say this, the more real you are, the more people will listen to you. It's a big difference. I can walk around with self-righteous and great pride, and I'm such a great, powerful servant of God. Or I can just say, I'm his glorified secretary, and sometimes I get that message wrong. And I still believe that. So in this class, I want you to glean some things. Your history is important. And you need to sit down and write down what your relationship was with your mother, with your father, and with your siblings. Write down the positive things and write down the negative. And you see what is impact you the more by what you put down on that paper in the first 4 things, or 5 at the most. If you've written down 5 things and all 5 things are negative, then that's still influencing you as an adult. If you can't come up with anything on that list, but all you can come up with is goodness on the list where it comes to your parent, your family member, your siblings, then you can see you have a better balance in life. Life is not perfect. Life is full of uncharted waters. But what we do with that really is going to impact how we are successful in our personal relationships, first with God, and secondly, with everybody else we come in contact with. I'm trying to teach this series, started a couple of weeks ago, about relationships and communication. And I really want you to seize what I'm saying. If you are struggling right now in your marriage, in your relationship, and no deal breakers have been done, then that's when you start looking at how you can improve yourself. Julian, if I were to ask you, what were some of the deal breakers for you and Stacy? I know you both agreed on them, but I would like for you to make that statement for everybody to hear. What were some deal breakers?
I'll give you a couple of them. First of all is trust. Number 1 was trust. If we can't trust each other, how can you live with somebody that you don't trust? Now, obviously, infidelity was one of them. But here's one that I think a lot of people don't really think about. But one of our deal breakers was throwing each other under the bus. That's one of the things, like I said, that I don't think people think about that one, but that's, if you ever to do that to your spouse, just throw them under the bus for whatever reason, you're trying to get out of whatever problems or anything. From that point on, it's going to create a distrust. You're going to be watching your back every time they say something, every time they do something after that. And it's going to lead you to a road that you don't really want to go through because, like I said, you're going to lose trust after that. And like I said, you go back.
Okay, let's expand a minute, Julian, on throwing people under the bus, because some people don't understand that terminology. So, as an example, if I threaten to call the police on you, is that throwing them under the bus?
It would be, because if it's something that we have to work out ourselves, we have to, like I say, the communication has to be there for us to try to work out the problems. Any situation comes up, we have to be mature enough to deal with it ourselves, or to try to deal with it. And that's what, like I said, that I do understand that some people need, outside help, but if you're not willing to work it out yourselves first, then it's not going to work. Whoever you go to, it's not going to work out, because you have to be willing first. And that's one thing that me and Stacey always try to do. We always try to fix everything ourselves before we involve anybody.
Now, what about this? What if I threatened you to expose something you did in the past? Would you call that throwing it under the bus?
Yes, it would be, because, see, one of the things that I told Stacey from the beginning, that I pretty much, because like she said, we talked a lot, hours at a time. And one of the things that I always told her that, I'm going to tell you everything I am, who I am, what I think, what I believe in, all this. I'm going to give you everything. But I understand one thing. Me giving you all of this is for you to get to know who I am, for you to know what I believe, what I don't believe, what I tolerate, I don't tolerate. But so I'm giving you everything here and now. But if you ever bring one of these things up later on and throw it in my face, then we're going to have a serious issue. Because I'm being vulnerable right now. I'm giving you everything so you will know ahead of time who you're marrying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's very important that if I feel there's a point that needs to be shared for some reason, that person never tries to blackmail me, use it against me, say ugly things in reference to me. If anything, they need to learn to keep their mouth shut, and they should never be given a second chance.
No, that's like I said, that's a deal breaker for us. I mean, you throw your spouse under the bus. To me, that's a deal breaker. You can't go back from that.
No, you really can't. You can't go back and say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it, because I still believe you're saying what you mean. And if you didn't mean to say it, it wouldn't have come to your head to say it. But that was what was in your heart. And someone said, well, I was just angry and I just responded. Well, then you're going to ask yourself, why do you keep responding the same way? What we have a tendency to do in maturity or lack of maturity is take responsibility for our own actions. I don't need you to tell me where I was at fault. I've got a conscience that's still at this point, that's still in effect. If there's something I didn't see and I ask you for your input, then obviously I want to hear your input. Now, in that case, I'm talking about friendship. I'm not talking about marriage. I'm not talking about long-term relationships, but I'm saying that in a long-term relationship, it's got to be more than super glue. It's got to be that bonding that doesn't break, no matter what materials have been put to it. Here they call it E6000 or E5000. I can't remember what they call it in the United States, but it's a permanent bonding. And we've got to have that foundation that's unshakable for not only your relationship, but you have children that are grown. You've got 3 grown children and daughter-in-law, and who knows when you're going to have sons-in-laws and when they're going to have children. So you are setting the pace, grandpa and dad, father-in-law, for how you want your established family to interact. It's not just about you and Stacy anymore. It's about you and your 3 children and their spouses and your grandchildren. So that nucleus grows, and depending on that core value depends on how that extended family will interact and become strong. The problem I always had in my first marriage is that my first husband eventually went into drugs and alcohol. So he was always going to his parents and lying on me. And they hated me with a passion. I didn't even know why. And it was closer to when Rob was just before his death that he said, the reason my parents hate me is because I always lied on you. If I'd known that, I would have known he never cared. He didn't try to protect me. He just tried to make me look bad. Those were many signs that at that time in my life, I did not and believe in divorce. And because of my spiritual position, I still don't believe in divorce. And that's because of the position I hold. That does not mean I wouldn't recommend somebody to get a divorce in a heartbeat. It's just for me and where I stand, I can't do that. Now, there's going to be a lot of marriages and divorces, and there's going to be a lot of extenuating circumstances, and each person knows in their own heart what was the element without having to make it a broadcasting newspaper, making it known all over the internet. Whatever happened, happened, and that's the end of that. I think, although this segment's lasting a little bit longer, I think it's still very important that we're still talking about history and how history has affected us in our current life right now. We can say, I trust God, and we must. But we also need to ask ourselves, are we being the best example, the best individual for God? Are we being the best person that the world interacts with that reflects the love of God? All of this comes into play. If I can't express to my child, my children, my grandchildren, how much I love them without hesitation, with just being naturally, without saying, well, I really need to contact them, then I better step back and ask myself, what is wrong with me? It's very easy for me to pick up the phone, and I'm always being mindful of what time it is and the part of the country my son is in.
Excuse me.
And text him or call him, depending on what I know is on his agenda. But there's not a day, not one day that goes by that I can recall. There may be, and I don't remember it, that I haven't said, good night, son. I love you. He always says to me, good night, beautiful mama. I love you the highest number in the world. And there are no highest numbers. He said this from the time he could talk. And I've come back in recent years and said, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Not so. Because I had a 9-month head start on you. So ditto. That's how we wind down our statement. Mom, I love you the highest number in the world. And there is no highest number. If we truly, truly love as God wants us to love, we cannot be afraid to vocalize that. We cannot be hesitant to express that unless it's us that we need to step back and take a real close look at us. Why can't I connect? Why is it that I don't want to express this? No, it's not just because how it would appear. You know the appropriate and inappropriate approaches. So it's not that. It's just that for some reason you haven't broke down that inner barrier that separates you from being what the world can see in you, which is God. So I would say this in closing. We've really got to look at how history has affected us and ask ourselves, why am I so determined to do it my way and not be teachable? I saw a lot of ugliness in my parents' relationship. The sad thing is that I didn't know until I was older that for many, many years my dad had been consistently unfair to my mother and had multiple affairs on my mother. And I can look at it now and say, I think I kind of understand her. Unfortunately, she's passed now, been gone for a number of years, but life is what you make it. It's not who you make it or who you make to fit your life. It's what you make it. How do I improve myself and be the best me? And I can't write it in a journal. I have to sometimes just shed my tears and come to the realization I can't do anything about my relationship with my parents. They're gone. My siblings, they're gone. But I can do something about right now with every relationship that I have at this current time and forward. And I think that if we all get that in our head, no, you can't change your mom, you can't change your dad, you can't change circumstances, but you can change you to be the best you now. That speaks the entire mission in one simple statement. Be the best you that you can be. And everything else will fall into place.
We're thrilled to introduce you to a collection of compelling and inspirational books penned by incredible authors who have navigated life's challenges and emerged victorious through God's unwavering love and mercy. One of these fantastic books is Fighting Hell, Headed to Israel, written by Cheryl Remington. Another amazing book is Be Ye Holy, Survivor's Guide, written by Cheryl Remington. Another amazing book is Indy's Tales of the Infamous J.D. Kilo, Only God Knows, written by Bo Charles. Then there is this phenomenal book, I Wear My Cape Under My Dress, written by Stacy Rocha. There is yet another amazing book, The Unexpected Journey, written by Felipe Giovanni. And finally, there is this amazing book, Shame Walked in Wearing My Face, written by Stephanie Ballard. You can find all of these books on Amazon.com, and well as our website, www.cheryl-remington.com.
Thank you for watching Cheryl Remington. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be notified of any and all future videos.